Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us can engage in this lifetime, as well as strategies to slow or stop those fights. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today, I'm joined by Nate Kelly, author, creator, and host of the Sobriety Diaries podcast and long-term sober human. Welcome, Nate, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Daryl. I'm honored to be a part of this and excited to welcome you to the podcasting space.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm very new, but so far so good. I've done a couple and I'm absolutely loving it and just loving having conversations with people who are interesting and who do really cool things and having a lot of conversations with sober folks, which we both are, which is incredibly helpful. And when I just did your introduction, I know I forgot a little piece that I should have remembered. So let us know what else you do, if you don't mind. I know you've got a big plate there.
I do, and it keeps me out of trouble. It keeps me busy. So that's been a sort of secondary perk of all of this. But yeah, I think one of the unexpected benefits to podcasting, when I first started, I was lucky enough to kind of have some immediate traction with the first show, the Sobriety Diaries, and being a evergreen entrepreneur, I started to think like, wow, I think I have something here. I should start kind of formulating the plan of what I've done to generate this success, and perhaps I can help others do the same in the future. And that's exactly what I've done, by the grace of God and the promises, which we were talking about before you hit record. I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more, but I've now launched Pod Studio recently, which we offer a full suite of podcast production and also live streaming and live video production services. So if you're interested in that, head over to podcastnate.com. But yeah, just being able to help others to find their voice and share it with the world has really been one of the unexpected benefits, and to kind of see the almost tree of life bloom. I've helped this person and they've gone on to help 10 others, or whatever it may be. It's a really beautiful thing.
That's wonderful. Congratulations on launching all of these things that you're doing and writing a book. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And I love it. I've done entrepreneurial stuff for a long, long time. And it is great to be able to sort of plug into life in that way. And many times, being an entrepreneur allows us a little bit of room to move to help other people, which is a great thing.
Yes, it really does. I was just visiting my mom in South Carolina not long ago, and it dawned on me how sort of the entrepreneurial spirit is truly a thing, because for her, working in education and corporate America for the majority of her career, she liked to just unplug at the end of the day and not think about it, and sort of stay within this box of things that she was expected to do at her job. And, I was checking emails at 8 p.m. and sending a follow-up email, at the breakfast table at 6 in the morning. And, you find time to do things that fits with your schedule and your client's schedule. And, it's this balancing act that you sort of have to get good at if you don't want to crash and burn. And it was sort of a moment of realization that, I'm truly in the right spot. That is the life I sort of dreamed of, being able to do something that I love every day and help other people and be able to incorporate it into daily life and, still have time to do things like visit my parents or, steal away an hour in the afternoon for a nap because I love a good nap, Daryl.
As do I. As do I. Oh no,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I
Yeah.
love to hear that. It's funny because I was saying to somebody the other day, I think it was yesterday actually, that my wife and I talk about weekends, like, oh, the weekend's coming up, but we don't do anything different on the weekends.
What is a weekend? Yeah.
We just, we both have things that we do that we love. I've been fortunate enough to become an author recently, which is wonderful. I've got another book coming out in July, but it's amazing how if and we'll get to sort of the origin stuff in a minute here, but as we pursue life, opportunities just arise and they keep arising. And the most difficult thing now, which isn't difficult actually, is what do I say no to? What things can I say no to, which is part of, again, before we hit record, it's those things we talked about with self-care and that sort of stuff. How do I best take care of myself? So that's great. I love, being able to visit your parents, visit your mom. I mean, that's just a great thing, and be able to have your time and take an hour nap and that sort of thing. It's a wonderful lifestyle, but the other part of it is not necessarily for everyone.
Very true. Yes, very true.
And I'm not one of those who need structure. Actually, I thrive in chaos.
Same. I cannot stand the confines of that box of things we're supposed to do. I'm like, fuck you. I got my own agenda here,
Right. Well, it goes back a long way for all of us, right? Because when we're young, we're handed that box. We're handed that box of, okay, this is what you have to believe, and this is how you have to think. And, so shedding that box, I think, is crucial. But it actually brings me to a thought regarding you and sort of, your story and where you came from and how you got to be the Nate Kelly of today. It's got to be an incredibly interesting story. Would love to hear that.
It's been a journey for sure. I think that I'm still perfecting it and perfecting in a way that's, realistic and achievable. I realize that I will never be perfect as a human, but I want to achieve kind of the perfect level of reality and perfect level of achieving my goals and continuing to grow. So I gosh, where do I start? I struggle when I tell my story about not leaning too heavily on the negative parts and, the more inspirational part. So I'm going to try to do that today because I think for me, especially in early recovery, that was more impactful when I heard those stories from other alcoholics. So I'm a Midwest boy, much like yourself. I grew up in small town Ohio and I don't think I lived a sheltered and closeted life because that wasn't the goal. I think it just kind of happened because of my environment and being raised in such a small town. My graduating class was 60 kids. It's the same teachers that my parents had in high school and the same 60 kids that I went to kindergarten with. So it was a very a bubble. I grew up in a bubble and always felt different. I think that's a running theme that I hear from other addicts and alcoholics. We always felt different. I think particularly for me, it was a little deeper than just not fitting in. I think I knew that there was a part of me that was just not similar to my peers, almost in my core, like as a part of my
Mm,
being. And I didn't realize what that was probably until high school. When other boys were looking at girls and getting cheerleaders' numbers, I realized that I was gay and that I wanted to get the football team's numbers and not the cheerleaders. So, you know, and being in that bubble or this sort of secluded environment, I had never been exposed to a gay person or understood what that meant, or, that in adulthood kind of things would be okay and I could live a normal life as a gay man. So it kind of instilled this level of fear and shame at an early age that it was, something I chose or a defect or a default within my being. So, again, from a small town, you and I have talked about this before, but kind of drinking was the thing to look forward to. Everybody did it in high school, and it just started out simply as that: partying on the weekends, getting a case of Natty Light, having a bonfire in someone's backyard or field. But I think the difference is immediately, like, even I could have had the worst hangover on the planet, and I couldn't wait to do it again,
mm,
whereas my friends could leave it on Saturday night, Sunday morning, and not think about it for a few weeks. It was just ruminating in my brain, like, "When are we doing it again? How are we gonna get the next case? Whose house are we partying at?" So I began to think alcoholically immediately. um, Being in high school and still living with my parents, I wasn't able to physically drink alcoholically until I left for college, and that's exactly what I did. Off to the races immediately, um, blacking out. Every weekend. It started to expand into the week. It eventually became every day. My senior year of high school, I started to have some consequences here and there. Got knocked out at a house party for mouthing off. My first DUI, things that were, consequences and heavy at the time, but I was able to kind of get through them unscathed.
mm.
Pay my fine, go to court, kind of forget about that. Healed my black eye, forgot about that, and just continued on with the party. It wasn't until after I had graduated and was in, the workforce, kind of adulting for a few years, that, I finally got stopped dead in my tracks. And, uh, a normal person who didn't think or act alcoholically um, probably would have had a wake up call, but I did not. It was New Year's Eve. I was at my sister's house and I had had a headache, for this kind of dull thumping headache, for almost a week, maybe 10 days, but was just, ignoring it like any good alcoholic, just waking up with my morning vodka and trying to forget about the headache and move on. But that night, I dropped to the floor in my sister's kitchen
Mm,
and lost the sort of function of the right side of my body. I couldn't speak to her to tell her what was happening, didn't know what was happening. And we get to the hospital, and um, I had a stroke at the age of 32 as a direct result of my alcoholism and
oh,
just
wow.
destroying my body for the last 15 years and ignoring high blood pressure and ignoring all these other signs. Um, and yeah, Daryl Layden had to learn to walk again, use my fingers and extremities again. Learned, thank the Lord, I didn't lose any cognitive ability or vocabulary, but spent 6 weeks in the hospital physically rehabilitating my body, and thought about alcohol every single day. stopped at the liquor store on the way home from the hospital and continued on for about another 8 months. And in the meantime, in that space there, my best friend got sober. She started going to meetings, and as perfectly as she could have, just sprinkled in the attraction, not the promotion. I go to meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. If you ever want to join me, it was never,
Mm.
I think you should go to a meeting. I think you have a problem. It was, hey, head into the meeting. Let me know if you want to join next week, and just perfectly sort of setting the stage for what would become eventually getting into treatment and embracing AA and the 12 steps. And 8.5 years later, I can say that AA saved my life. Kelsey saved my life. My sister saved my life
Mm.
in that moment in the kitchen. And, my recovery certainly has evolved, and I'm not in the rooms every day like I was when I first got sober. I lean on the support of the online sober community, the Sobriety Diaries, and talking to other alcoholics and hearing their stories weekly certainly helps. So, um, yeah, I think it's important to let your recovery evolve and sort of add things or transition things or change things as they suit you or as they suited me as I move through this life.
That's great. I'm so happy you're sober, and I really appreciate you
Me
sharing
too.
your
Me
story,
too.
Nate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. I think it's the most difficult thing in the world, right? In the beginning of being sober. It was for me, I was young. I was very young, and probably younger than most when I got sober, and hearing your story of how things progressed through college and then after college, and just the sort of downhill slide, right? It's crazy how it doesn't get better on its own. It doesn't get better until there's some sort of an intervening, whatever that is. and
Right.
and and I use the 12 steps too, and that's how I got sober. But and I also think we were talking about sort of that box of stuff that we're handed, right? That we're told we have to believe. And I love that you expand and expanded, and I'm sure continue to expand, what it is, how you do life, how you do sobriety. You start to figure out what resonates, right? And what doesn't resonate. And for me, part of my fight, and it was okay, I've got to shed all of this stuff that I sort of knew when I got sober. But then as I get sober, I also have to shed other things. I have to shed things that might be limiting, or things that might keep me from learning more or experiencing things in a different way. Have you found that it sounds like you found there's an expansion of your self, and how you go about doing things, and maybe that box just doesn't fit anymore, even sometimes the box which can be a 12-step program.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And sometimes these things or these routines or parts of our life that we get stuck in, almost like a rut that seems like a comfort, but to your point, can be holding us back to some degree. And I guess I can certainly relate that to 12 steps. And this is, I'm certain, not AA approved, or it kind of goes against some of the principles, but I found myself in meetings really just realizing all of the negative aspects to the story. And this is just my experience, but it started to influence me in a negative way, sort of sharing with other alcoholics the maybe negative aspects of my addiction and not focusing on the glory of recovery and the beauty and the inspiration. So I did find myself shying away from meetings a little bit, and I share this because, if there are other folks in the room who feel this way, you can still participate and be a member of AA and utilize the program for the community and to surround yourself with like-minded individuals and to have your running buddies and meet with other alcoholics, which is what I do and what I still utilize the program for, and introduce other things that may help your recovery or your mental health or your self-care. I found that I really needed to be centered, and meditation every morning really does that for me. And part of the fight that I'm still fighting, as I sort of grow into this next chapter of my life, is the self care and understanding that if I don't find that if I'm not centered and if I'm not clear on, what my goals are, whether it's daily, monthly, yearly goals, if I'm not clear on how I want to show up in the world and represent myself to others, then things around me start to crumble or not go smoothly, or my relationships suffer a little bit because I'm snippy in a conversation or things like this. And I was saying to Daryl again before we hit record, I find that it's almost like a cyclical pattern for myself. Like every couple months, it dawns on me, oh shit, okay, this is probably what's happening. I'm not doing the best self care. I'm not, taking time for myself each morning and having that grounding sort of silence or meditation, however you ground or meditate is perfect for you. So I think realizing that and committing to that as a priority and not sort of this cyclical up and down routine is something I'm fighting still. I'm getting better. And I think realizing and acknowledging it, or anything that you may find yourself fighting against in your life, is kind of the first step to overcoming it.
Certainly is. And I mentioned this earlier, but thank you so much for your honesty, Nate, about that, because it's one of the hardest things. And for me, is admitting that there's something in the armor that isn't quite where it should be, or
Yeah.
something that I'm feeling that those are hard things to admit. And the fact that you're talking about them and we're sharing about that sort of stuff, I think is incredibly powerful for both of us. Just that relating piece, right? Of person in recovery to person in recovery, but it also heals the person that's sharing, which I think is wonderful. And I have spent, and it doesn't, however long we've been sober is how long we've been sober. And I've been sober for a bit, but, I
19
spent
years, 20, is it 20? 19.
39.
Daryl, stop me in my tracks.
No, it's
Congratulations, my friend. Why did I think
No.
18? Oh, you went in when you were
Thank you.
18.
Yeah, I actually, just when I
Okay.
crossed over into 19 years old, I went into treatment.
Amazing.
But
Amazing.
no, I appreciate you saying that, but I look at it truly 100% is I am grateful, and it's the grace of God, and it's I just my job, which is do the work, which is just exactly what you were speaking about, is doing that work. And you're doing so many wonderful things, with other recovering people, and with your podcast and helping people out and expanding your life. You're expanding outside of, which is which is what it's all about. It really is. I truly believe that it's expanding my life so that I can help expand other people's lives. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. I want to be that for other people. But the you know, in my book, I just remembered a line about, my sobriety has been about praying and not praying, meditating and not meditating, doing
Yes,
my breathing practices and not doing my breathing practices, being grateful and not being grateful, right? That's the fight.
it is the fight. Absolutely. And it's, I feel prior to going into the rooms, I had no idea that like people lived sober lives, or that there was this program that helped you, or that recovery and like treatment options were even a thing. So that the majority of my first few years in the rooms was just soaking in all of this information and trying to retain everything that I heard and saw, and conversations that I had with other alcoholics, and seeing and hearing that honesty and that vulnerability from day one was just like the craziest thing I had ever seen. And being so introverted and shy, I guess, for lack of a better word, but internalizing everything really my entire life up to that point. It was just so freeing and felt like just an enormous weight off of my shoulders. So once I started sharing and, felt that, I mean, to your point, it definitely serves us, or those who are sharing or helping other people, in a way too. So I have to be honest about the self-serving aspect of it too, and the selfish nature I think that comes in sobriety and recovery, and recognizing that, we do need to hold ourselves as a priority as well. And, there can be a selfish nature to that, but that's okay.
Completely okay. And necessary. 100%
Necessary.
necessary.
Yeah.
It's there's we have in a little coin, right? To thine own self be true.
Yes.
And I didn't know this for the longest time, and probably most people do. I don't know, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's just me being a little maybe slower catching up with some of this stuff, but but the entire saying there is, and this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man.
Mm,
And that's from Hamlet. That's from Shakespeare. And
right.
and and so it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man, which means if I'm being true to myself, I am being true to you. And if I'm
Mm.
not being true to myself, I'm not being true to you either. And it's so incredible because you mentioned something, a couple minutes earlier about, oh, I get a little snippy if I'm not doing my stuff, and like that sort of stuff. And believe me, I can relate. I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
I can get cranky. So when I do those practices, and I don't, and I'm going to say it, if I stop fighting that this is what I just need to do every day, then I'm being true to myself, and I'm also being true to everyone else, because I can only pour from a cup that's full. I can't pour from a cup that's empty.
It's interesting. The way you just said that made me realize that, um, fighting can be fighting for your fighting for a job, or fighting for your happiness, or fighting the good fight in a way that you want these things, or it can be fighting against things, or like staving off the enemy, or whatever it may be. And I guess I'm sure it has in the past, but it dawned on me that fighting can be a positive or a negative, I guess, depending on how you look at it or what you are fighting.
100%. I could not agree more. And the the subtleties of fighting for me, and I'm fortunate that my sponsor said to me a long time ago, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops.
Hmm.
And that's why I titled my book that way, because I can fail to do things, and then I beat the crap out of myself for not doing them. So I'm having a tough time with the game when I don't do the things, but then I make it twice as bad by telling myself I'm crap because I didn't do them. And
Yes.
that's the fight, right?
It's the fight.
That is the fight. So yeah, it's there's this thing I know we've talked about in sobriety, and it is talked about in sobriety, but shoulds, we can should all over ourselves, and right, the should
Yeah.
monster comes out all the time. Oh, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or
Yeah.
blah blah blah, right? And that can be destructive.
Absolutely destructive. I think it speaks to that. Um, for me, okay, another thing, along with the rigorous honesty and the vulnerability that I learned very early on, was this idea of action.
Mm.
Gratitude is an action word, and there are these other things that mean nothing unless you put it into action. So when you say that should, the should monsters, that's what I think of. Oh, well, it's Saturday. I should go do that. Just zip your lip. Don't waste your breath in even saying that unless you're going to go do it.
Right.
If you should go and visit your grandma today, go visit your grandma today, or whatever it may be. The shoulds, I think, and then we feel bad because we didn't do it. So yes, the rigorous honesty, the ability to put things into action, these are all pillars of the program, and things that I embraced early on for sure.
And discerning, right? Discerning
Mm,
what is, Napoleon Hill says, or said, discerning what's necessary versus what's important. Because I can get all caught up in 1,000 important things, but there's probably 3 things that are necessary.
great
And
point. Yes.
and for me, my daily practices are absolutely necessary.
Mm,
And sometimes I tell myself that the 1,000 things that are important supersede the 3 things that are necessary, and they don't. The necessary things are the necessary things, and that may change over time as I grow and morph, and things become different in my life, but there's always going to be those necessary things that are going to be the foundation for moving forward again. And that's up to me as I learn more and I become better within me. I can discern those things. So I'm sorry.
no, no, you're good.
I was thinking, and we're sort of moving to the end. I swear we could talk for probably 2
How's
hours,
it been
but
33 minutes already? That's crazy.
I know it is. It is. But so who or what is your greatest ally when it comes to slowing or stopping the fight?
Mm, great question. Wow. I would say that, I don't know if I can pinpoint a person or a thing, but I think an action or an idea for me is my greatest asset when it comes to stopping the fight, and that is reaching out to other people
Mm,
and realizing that I don't need to, and in fact I can't do it alone. So recognizing that community aspect and embracing the honesty and the vulnerability when reaching out and, therapy as an example. My first few therapists didn't really work out. We just weren't really like meshing that great. And I look back and I'm like, well, no shit. I was just lying to them the whole time. I wasn't being honest. I was sugarcoating things that I was feeling. It's not anything that they did. I just wasn't being honest or providing them with any sort of baseline to me or my character.
Mm.
So I think reaching out, embracing those that you have in your corner as a resource, and being honest and vulnerable when doing so, for me has been huge.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And allies, our allies will be, for me, they've been different allies at different times. Different things are more powerful than others at different times. And that keeps morphing as we continue to go. But there's always value in reaching out and speaking with people who we know get it, or we know who are on a very similar journey. I think that's incredibly helpful.
Yes,
So,
change the game for me, for sure.
right. Yeah. If you were to offer advice to people embarking on the journey of, let's call it, changing their lives or a different way of life, whether it's sobriety or they just need to change or figure things out, what would your advice be?
Mm. Well, since that tactic has been so helpful for me, I would say try to identify your allies early
Mm,
on, or if you're feeling alone or that you don't have allies at this point, make that a priority. If you're stepping into the rooms of AA, or if you've signed up for therapy, or if you're starting a yoga class, whatever it may be, try to identify folks who you can relate to and that will be your allies and that you can have in your corner, so that you do have the ability to reach out and communicate, perhaps ask for help when needed, shoot the shit on a Friday night, whatever it may be. Identify and create your sort of corner of allies. I would say to find some resources within your industry or your niche. So, yoga, for example, there are probably 10,000 yoga podcasts on the air right now. There are a
mm,
ton of yoga audiobooks. There are uh, ha- Friday night happy hour yoga groups. Find some resources within your niche to continue that sort of education on whatever journey that you're embarking on. So, your people, your resources, and I would say to create some personal goals for the upcoming future, 6 months, a year. Make sure they're achievable. Don't go crazy on yourself. But I think accomplishing things and sort of checking things off the proverbial list is important, or was important for me to realize that, things aren't going to change overnight. But when you
mm.
can look back or see or realize that something has changed, or that you've gotten better in a particular area or accomplished one of those goals, I think, especially for me, it just created that sort of kick or that extra motivation to move on to the next goal, or, uh, you know, create the next plan or path. So the people, the resources, and some personal goals.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love that, Nate. Thank you. Because it's difficult, and I know when I was first coming up in changing my life and trying to have things be different, there's so much information out there, and especially now, there's just so much out there that we have to wade through, right? To get some information on how we want to be different, or how we want to change, or how we want to grow, or how we want to move forward. And breaking it down into simple bite-sized pieces, like the three things that you mentioned, I think it's so important. And for me, I can be a maniac, and I can be a very sort of, driven human being, and I have to reel myself in a little bit, and I have to, right.
Yes.
It's
Totally
so
feel that.
right. It's so
Yes.
important for the self-care, for
Yeah.
the, taking care of ourselves. And because I've fried myself 1,000 times since being sober,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's easy to do. So again, I think that goes back to the necessary versus important, right? If there's 3 things that are necessary, do those, and until I get myself reeled back in. I've loved our discussion, and I want everyone to know how they can find you and find your wonderful work that you're doing out there. If you could share that, I'd
Thank
love it.
you. Yes, I'd love to. Well, first, you can find the Sobriety Diaries wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can go to thesobrietydiaries.com to direct you to listening platforms. You can also apply to be a guest on the show at that website. If you're interested in producing or starting your own podcast or live streaming or direction for social media, head over to podcastnate.com. You can book a discovery call with our team. And I'm also at Podcast Nate on all social media platforms. So give a follow if you're interested in recovery or audio video production or both.
That's great. Thank you, Nate. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for your honesty and your time. And it's been an absolute joy having you on. I really appreciate it.
Daryl, thank you so much. So grateful that we crossed paths. Very excited to see the growth of the podcast and your brand. And thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you, Nate. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Daryl.